Thomas and Friends All Engines Go is derided by fans for a lot of reasons, but one of them is the switch to 2D animation. It's the one we gravitate to because out of all the problems it was the easiest one to fix. So how would I fix it? Let's get into it. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to be notified about the latest videos. We'll always try to keep the trains running on schedule for you. Thomas has gone through many iterations during his decades-long career, from storybooks to live action to 3D CGI and now 2D animation. Before I get into my own thoughts on this, we need to look at each part of these iterations individually. Why am I bringing this up? Because each iteration of the franchise had its own trials and tribulations. Trust me, it does leg into my overall point, so please bear with me. The Railway series had 7 illustrators, over 42 books, and 6 of them were under Wilbert's reign. William Middleton illustrated the first book, Reginald Payne II. C. Reginald Dalby illustrated 9 books, as well as re-illustrating the first 2. John T. Kennedy worked on 6, and Gunvor and Peter Edwards rounded off Wilbert's reign by illustrating 9 books, while Christopher Awdry only had Clive Sprong in his 28-year run. He still illustrated 15 books. Who's the best illustrator? That's what my Railway Reviews series is about, so please check it out if you can. Live action started with a disastrous broadcast with the BBC in 1953. Andrew Lloyd Webber wanted to do a musical interpretation of the series in 1973, which never went ahead. Thank you God. Before Britt Allcroft finally acquired the rights and adapted it successfully in 1984. Series 1 to Series 5 were constantly pushing the boundaries of how far children's entertainment could go, especially with direction and production, with sets becoming more atmospheric and stories becoming a lot more intense, especially in Series 5. Then Hit Entertainment took over in 2002, and while it's not terrible, you could tell the quality of work was on the decline. There was a live action CGI hybrid for the 12th series in 2008, provided by Hit Entertainment's subsidiary, Hot Animation, before the show transitioned into full CGI in 2009 with Nitrogen Studios. After the 16th series, production was moved from Nitrogen Studios to Arc Productions in Toronto. Arc remained as the production studio until the final series in 2020, which was animated by Jamfeld, again based in Toronto. At the time of this recording, the franchise has been rebooted and the 3D CGI has been replaced with 2D animation, with new, refreshed designs for the characters. The animation is being done by Nelvana Enterprise Inc., who are also co-producing All Engines Go. The redesign of the engines have been panned by fans and critics alike, specifically the unrealistic interpretations of the steam engines and the world that they live in. While some people say that Thomas is a show that's just for babies and toddlers, it wasn't always like this. Wilbur Awdry's Railway series books were published over the course of 27 years, 1945 until 1972. So the people that were children being read these stories at the start of the run were adults possibly reading their stories to their children by the end of it. Wilbur drew off real life events as inspiration for his stories, and they evolved as the years went on, from talking about nationalisation of the railway in the 3rd book, James the Red Engine, to discussing the demise of steam engines from Stepney the Bluebell engine onwards. This realism was further emphasised by the fact that Wilbur and his brother George wrote the book The Island of Sodor, Its People, History and Railways in 1987, the year I was born. It firmly established that not only did Sodor exist in the real world, there was an entire lore created around it. It's got more lore than Middle Earth. It's got more lore than Game of Thrones. And this book came out just 3 years after the first series of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends hit our screens. This proves that All Engines Go being 2D is not specifically the problem. It's how they've went about it that's the problem. So what steps would I take to resolve it? Realistic animation? How would I do it? I'm glad you asked. As I've already mentioned, there have been several illustrators of the Railway series books. Middleton's illustrations were not the best because he didn't put any effort into it, because he didn't like the fact that it was about dirty old steam engines, and didn't think the series would last. Don't you just love when assholes are proven wrong? While Middleton's jaded attitude would fit in with the 21st century style of thinking, his animation sure wouldn't. Reginald Payne's style didn't have enough vibrance. It started the realism, but wouldn't have the right pop for 21st century animation. It's also why, as much as people love Gunvar and Peter Edwards, I wouldn't hire them either. Those illustrations scared me as a child, so it's not wise for modern audiences. So imagine them watching an adaptation of Mountain Engines in that animation style. Sadly, neither would be able to do it anyway, as Gunvar passed away in 2014, with Peter following suit 3 years later. So that narrows it down to 3. Dobby, Kenny, and Spawn. Dobby and Kenny's styles I think would fit in a 21st century 2D animation. Dobby had inconsistencies, but the vibrance of the colours leapt off the page at you, and they gave this right sense of childlike innocence that would be needed for modern day animation. However, Dobby passed away in 1983. Kenny had vibrant colours and a more realistic use of scale for the engines, but he passed away in 1972. That leaves us with Clive Spawn, 28 years in the business, 15 books to his name, the right mix of realism and vibrancy, and at the time of this recording, he's still alive. So if you base your argument on this, Spawn is the only candidate left, right? So you might think, let's widen our search parameters just a little bit. Realistic, vibrant, alive, and illustrated some form of original Thomas artwork. There have been many artists during this time and that could fall under these categories, so I'll narrow it down to the top 2 frontrunners in my opinion. Number 1, Owen Bell, also known as Owain Bell. Bell illustrated various Thomas projects, books, annuals, video cases, various merchandise packaging, jigsaws, and posters, working from 1981 until 1996. Owen has the kind of eccentric personality that I think either would have got on really well with Wilbert, or they would have been at loggerheads all the time. For example, Owen used the Welsh spelling of his name when he started doing the illustrations just for a giggle, but when he was no longer illustrating the Thomas merchandise, he went back to the original spelling. Is it just me or does that sound like a classic Wilbert Awdry move? The illustrations that Bell produced during this period, in my opinion, were miraculous. They captured the feel of classic Thomas so beautifully and evoked the same kind of warm, nostalgic feeling in me that people who grew up with the Railway series books must have felt when Thomas started in 1984. Bell currently creates award-winning digital media, so he's got the right use of technology at his disposal. The transition for Bell working with one-screen animation wouldn't be that much of a challenge for him either. Imagine seeing those drawings coming to life on your TV screen. In the words of Percy, whew, it makes my wheels wobble to think of it. Egmont Publishing UK is the current license holder of the Railway series books, and they have the right to release a variety of other Thomas and Friends books. One of these is the My Thomas Story Library, which was a series of books commissioned by Egmont in association with Hit Entertainment in 2003 and ran until 2011. The stories featured in some of these books were loose adaptations of the Railway series, both Wilbert and Christopher's stories, and adaptations of the TV series episodes. A few of the books also adapted stories from the Railway series that were skipped in the TV series. I was handed down some of these books to read to my sons when they were newborns at bedtime. That way I could start reading them in my own collection and not have them destroyed. The books were illustrated by Robin Davies and Jerry Smith, and I think that these books would be a brilliant transitional series from series 24 to All Engines Go. The illustrations are realistic, the colours are fantastic, and they clearly respect the source material. Donald and Douglas are painted blue in these illustrations, much like the Railway series books. They did have enough of a twist to take things in their own unique direction. They also done better iterations of stories such as Spotless Record and peace and quiet, but that's just my own personal opinion. He even mentioned the Arsdale engines in Duck's book. If used properly, I believe that this style of animation would keep children entertained, and the adults would also appreciate the nostalgic feel to the show. So if you add these two sets of illustrators into the mix with Spong, realistically, Spong's out of the running. While I do respect his commitment, his style, and the fact that he improved so much as they went on, the lack of consistency in his first illustrations easily knocks him out. Read his first book and look at the engine's pupils. They are absolutely terrifying. They don't need to be that big. Phrasing. So who would I pick out of the ones remaining? Bell from the 80s to 90s, Davies and Smith from the noughties to the 2010s. This was a tough decision, but I've got to go with Davies and Smith. My nostalgia naturally draws me to Bell. Yes, draw, pardon the pun. And seeing his work come alive on screen would be a really immersive experience for me. But I don't think Bell would be able to play ball in corporate Mattel world. That needs to be left as a product of nostalgia. A nice, unique insight into a better time. Davies and Smith have the right blend of old school respect for the source material and a modern style that would fit in with Mattel's mould. They already showed they could play ball with hit, and their illustrations would be able to generate that new generation of fans that a legacy such as Thomas needs to survive. I also think that because they work with hit, they would have enough sway to be able to hold their ground against corporate meddling and get their version of Thomas and Friends off the ground in the same way Andrew Brenner did with the Renaissance in the CGI era. So that's my thoughts on the 2D animation for Thomas and Friends. What's your thoughts on it? Until next time, keep on chugging!